The fog clung to Willow Grove Cemetery like a shroud, and Clara Thompson's heart pounded as she stumbled through the mist, her flashlight flickering. She'd come to lay flowers on her husband's grave, but a sudden crack, a branch or something worse, had shattered the silence. At 68 she wasn't spry, and the slick path threatened to betray her footing. Her breath caught as shadows danced beyond the headstones, whispering of danger in this sacred place. Was someone there, watching? Her fingers tightened on the roses, their thorns pricking her palm. Then from the haze a pair of eyes gleamed, low, steady, not human. Clara froze, fear and curiosity warring within her. What was out there? Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The eyes belonged to a dog, thin and gray-muzzled, lying beside a headstone just beyond Clara's beam of light. The tension in her chest eased, though her pulse still thrummed. The dog didn't move, didn't bark, just watched her, with a gaze so deep it seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. Clara exhaled, the fog swirling around her breath, and stepped closer, her boots crunching on damp leaves. The headstone read, Eleanor Hayes, 1935 to 2014, etched with a simple lily. The dog's presence felt deliberate, as if it belonged to this grave, to this woman Clara had never known. Boothbay Harbor, Maine, was waking slowly on this autumn morning in 2015, its coastal chill seeping into Clara's bones. She'd lived here all her life, but the cemetery, nestled among pines and overlooking the gray Atlantic, had become both sanctuary and burden since her husband Tom died a year ago. At 68, Clara felt unmoored, her days blurring into routines of coffee, books, and solitary walks. The librarian in her had once thrived on stories, but now her own felt unfinished, her purpose buried with Tom. Coming here was habit. Yet today, this dog stirred something, a flicker of curiosity she hadn't felt in months. Clara knelt, ignoring the ache in her knees, and set the roses by Tom's grave, 2 plots away. The dog's eyes followed her, calm but piercing, as if it understood her ritual. Its fur was matted, ribs faintly visible, yet it held a quiet dignity. No collar, no tags, just a presence that seemed to belong to the earth itself. Clara wondered who Eleanor Hayes was, why this dog chose her grave. Had it been here all night, through the cold? The thought tugged at her, a pang of empathy for a creature as alone as she felt. The fog began to lift, revealing the cemetery's gentle slopes, dotted with headstones worn by time and salt air. Clara stood, brushing dirt from her coat, and glanced at the dog again. It hadn't moved, but its gaze held her, steady as a lighthouse beam. She wanted to speak, to ask it something absurd like, "Who are you waiting for?" But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she turned toward the path, her flashlight now steady and headed for the gate. The crack she'd heard earlier was likely nothing. A squirrel, a falling twig, but it had rattled her, reminding her how fragile she felt in this vast, quiet place. As she reached the cemetery's iron gate, Clara heard a soft shuffle behind her. She turned, and there was the dog, following at a distance. Its steps slow but deliberate. It stopped a few yards away, sitting on the gravel path, watching her with that same unyielding gaze. Clara's heart skipped, not from fear now, but from a strange sense of invitation. It was as if the dog wanted her to return, to unravel whatever story bound it to Eleanor's grave. She clutched her scarf, the morning's chill sharper now, and promised herself she'd come back tomorrow. Clara's cottage by the harbor was a short walk, its clappered walls weathered by decades of sea winds. Inside she brewed tea, the kettle's whistle a small comfort against the silence. Her mind kept drifting to the dog, its eyes like still pools reflecting something she couldn't name. Tom would have laughed, called her a softy for worrying about a stray, but he'd have been out there with a blanket by noon. Clara smiled at the memory, then frowned as loneliness crept in. She'd always been the listener, the one who held space for others' stories, but who listened to hers now? The dog wasn't just a stray, she sensed. Its refusal to leave Eleanor's side spoke of loyalty, maybe love, the kind that didn't fade with death. Clara sipped her tea, staring out at the harbor's gray expanse. Boothbay was a town of stories, fishermen, artists, widows like her, but the cemetery held the ones no one told anymore. Eleanor Hayes, whoever she was, had left something behind in that dog, and Clara needed to know what. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a lifeline, a thread pulling her out of the fog of her own grief. She pulled a notebook from her shelf, a habit from her librarian days, and jotted down Eleanor Hayes, 1935 to 2014. Dog, no name, gray, loyal. It felt silly, but it grounded her, gave her a purpose beyond the endless cycle of mourning. Tomorrow she'd ask around, maybe talk to Henry Brooks, the gardener who seemed to know every blade of grass in Willow Grove. He'd mentioned the dog appeared shortly after Eleanor's burial, defying attempts to shoo it away. There was a story there, Clara was sure, one that might mirror her own in ways she couldn't yet see. As dusk fell, Clara lit a candle, its flame dancing in the cottage's drafty air. She thought of Tom, his laugh, his hand in hers, and then of the dog, alone but steadfast. The cemetery wasn't just a place of endings, she realized. It held beginnings, too, if you looked closely. Rusty, she decided to call it, for the color of its fur in the fading light. Rusty didn't know her, didn't need her, yet something in its gaze had reached out, a silent greeting that promised more. Clara went to bed with a plan. She'd return, not just for Tom, but for Rusty, for Eleanor, for the story waiting to unfold. The next morning loomed in her mind, a chance to step back into Willow Grove, to see if Rusty was still there, still watching. Clara didn't know what she'd find, but the dog's presence had cracked open a door she'd thought long closed. It wasn't just about a grave or a name, it was about connection, about finding meaning in a world that felt too quiet. She'd follow Rusty's lead, wherever it took her, because sometimes a single look could change everything. Clara Thompson woke to the sound of gulls crying over Boothbay Harbor, their calls sharp against the quiet of her cottage. The memory of the gray-muzzled dog lingered, his eyes a beacon in the fog of yesterday's visit to Willow Grove Cemetery. She'd promised herself she'd return not just for Tom, but for the dog she'd named Rusty, for the mystery of Eleanor Hayes. At 68, Clara wasn't one for whims, but something about Rusty's steadfast vigil stirred her, a ripple in the still pond of her days. She dressed warmly, the October chill already seeping through her windows, and tucked her notebook into her coat pocket. Today, she'd watch, learn, maybe understand. The cemetery gate creaked as Clara stepped through, the morning sun cutting through wisps of mist. Willow Grove stretched before her, its headstones like silent sentinels under a canopy of pines. She scanned the rows, her breath catching as she spotted Rusty exactly where she'd left him, curled beside Eleanor's grave. His fur caught the light, a muted russet against the granite, and his eyes flicked up to meet hers. No wag, no sound, just that gaze, deep as the harbor at dusk. Clara approached slowly, her boots crunching leaves, and knelt a few feet away, respecting his space. "Morning, Rusty," she murmured, feeling foolish but compelled. He blinked, slow and deliberate, as if acknowledging her. Clara settled on a nearby bench, its wood worn smooth by years of mourners. She opened her notebook, pen poised, but her eyes stayed on Rusty. He didn't move, didn't chase squirrels or wander like other dogs might. Instead, he seemed anchored, his body a quiet testament to something Clara couldn't yet name. She jotted down observations. Rusty Gray Thin stays by Eleanor Hayes, 1935 to 2014. It was a start, a way to make sense of the pull she felt. The librarian in her craved order answers, but Rusty offered only presence. A puzzle wrapped in fur. A soft hum of voices drew Clara's attention. A funeral procession wound through the cemetery's central path, mourners in dark coats following a polished casket. Clara watched, expecting Rusty to stay put, but he rose, stiff but purposeful, and padded toward the group. She leaned forward, intrigued. He didn't intrude, didn't bark, just walked alongside, keeping pace with an elderly woman at the rear. The woman, her face lined with grief, glanced down at Rusty, and her shoulders seemed to soften as if his nearness eased a weight. When the group reached a fresh grave, Rusty sat a short distance away, watching until the last words were spoken. Then, as silently as he'd come, he returned to Eleanor's side. Clara's pen paused mid-sentence. There was intention in Rusty's actions, a rhythm she hadn't expected. He wasn't just a stray. He was part of this place, woven into its rituals of loss and remembrance. Her mind raced with questions. How long had he been here? Did anyone feed him, care for him? She thought of Henry Brooks, the gardener who'd spoken of Rusty yesterday. He'd know more, she was sure, but he was nowhere in sight, likely tending the far end of the grounds. As the morning wore on, Clara noticed others arriving, regulars, she guessed, by their familiar steps. A woman in her 70s, her gray hair pinned neatly, approached a grave 2 rows from Eleanor's. She carried a single chrysanthemum, her hands trembling as she placed it down. Clara watched, expecting her to leave, but the woman lingered, her gaze drifting to Rusty. "You're still here, aren't you?" she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that made Clara's chest tighten. Rusty lifted his head, meeting the woman's eyes, and she smiled, a tear glinting on her cheek. "Good boy." Clara couldn't stay silent. She rose, notebook in hand, and approached cautiously. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low. "Do you know him?" The woman turned, startled but kind, her eyes crinkling. "Oh, I suppose everyone here does in a way. I'm Ruth Carver." She gestured to the grave. "My daughter Ellen. Been gone 3 years now." Clara nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. "I'm Clara Thompson. I saw him yesterday by Eleanor Hayes's grave. I'm curious." Ruth's smile deepened. "He's special, that one. Showed up after Eleanor passed, maybe a year ago. Never leaves her side except to do what he did today. Walk with us, sit with us. When I first came after Ellen died, I was a mess. Couldn't stop crying. He just sat there, right by me, like he knew." Her voice cracked, and Clara felt a lump in her throat. Ruth wasn't just talking about a dog, she was talking about solace, the kind Clara hadn't found since Tom's death. They stood together, watching Rusty settle back by the headstone. Clara wanted to ask more, but Ruth's story felt sacred, not to be pressed. Instead, she glanced at Eleanor's grave, noticing something glint in the grass. A small tarnished locket, half buried under leaves. Her heart skipped. She bent down, brushing dirt away, and saw the initials E.H., etched on its surface. It was old, heavy with time, and Clara hesitated, unsure if she should touch it. Rusty's head lifted, his eyes locking on the locket, and he nudged it with his nose, a gentle push toward her hand. Clara froze, the air suddenly colder. It wasn't just a trinket, it was a piece of Eleanor, of Rusty's story. She slipped the locket into her pocket, her fingers tingling, and looked at Rusty. His gaze held no judgment, only a quiet urging, as if he trusted her with this fragment of his past. Ruth hadn't noticed, her eyes on her daughter's grave, but Clara felt the weight of a secret, one she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. "I should go," she said to Ruth, her voice unsteady, "but I'll be back." Ruth nodded, her hand resting on Ellen's headstone. "He'll be here, Clara. He always is." Clara forced a smile, her mind spinning. The locket, Rusty, Eleanor. They were connected, and she needed to know how. As she walked toward the gate, the harbor's salt air filled her lungs, sharp and alive. She'd find Henry tomorrow, ask what he knew, but more than that, she'd dig into Eleanor Hayes's life. The librarian in her was awake now, hungry for answers. Rusty didn't follow her this time, but Clara felt his presence linger, a tether pulling her back. The locket pressed against her hip, a question mark in metal. She didn't know what it meant, but it was a start, a clue to why a dog would guard a grave with such devotion. Booth Bay Harbor bustled beyond the cemetery, fishermen hauling nets, tourists snapping photos. But Clara's world had narrowed to Willow Grove, to Rusty's silent vigil. Tomorrow she'd return, not just to watch, but to uncover the story etched in those deep, waiting eyes. Clara Thompson sat at her kitchen table, the locket from Willow Grove Cemetery glinting under the morning light. Its tarnished surface, etched with E.H., felt heavy in her palm, a relic of Eleanor Hayes's life. Outside, Booth Bay Harbor hummed, with the clatter of lobster traps and the distant chime of a buoy, but Clara's mind was elsewhere, tethered to the gray-muzzled dog she'd named Rusty and his unwavering vigil. At 68, she'd spent decades organizing stories at the library. But this one, Rusty's, Eleanor's, felt like a book with missing pages. She tucked the locket into her pocket, grabbed her scarf, and headed for the library. Answers waited, if she could find them. The Booth Bay Harbor Memorial Library smelled of old paper and polished wood, a comfort Clara hadn't sought since Tom's death. She settled at a microfiche reader, her librarian instincts kicking in as she scanned obituaries from 2014. Eleanor Hayes, born 1935, died alone at 79, a nurse who'd served the town for decades. The notice was brief, no mention of family, only praise for her kindness. Clara frowned, the locket's weight pressing against her hip. Eleanor's life seemed quiet, unremarkable, yet Rusty's devotion suggested more, a love, a loss, something unspoken. She jotted notes, her pen scratching in the silence, and resolved to dig deeper. A librarian, young and eager, approached with a stack of local histories. "Need help, Mrs. Thompson?" she asked. Clara smiled, shaking her head. "Just chasing a ghost, I suppose." The girl laughed, unaware of how true it felt. Clara flipped through records, finding snippets, Eleanor volunteering at the clinic, Eleanor tending soldiers' families during Vietnam. Nothing about a dog, a locket, or a man who might have claimed her heart. Frustration gnawed at her, but she pictured Rusty's eyes, steady and trusting, urging her on. She'd try the cemetery next, maybe find Henry Brooks, but first she needed a lead. The clock struck noon, and Clara's stomach rumbled, reminding her she'd skipped breakfast. She stepped outside, the harbor's salt air sharp against her cheeks, and walked to a cafe down the street. Inside, the hum of conversation enveloped her. Fishermen swapping tales, tourists debating lobster rolls. Clara ordered tea and sat by the window, her notebook open. She was sketching the locket's design when an older woman slid into the seat across from her. "Clara Thompson, isn't it?" the woman said, her voice warm but weathered. "I'm Agnes Miller. Saw you at Willow Grove yesterday, talking to Ruth." Clara blinked, caught off guard. Agnes, in her early 70s, had gray curls and eyes that held a nurse's sharpness. "Yes, I was curious about the dog," Clara admitted, her fingers brushing the locket in her pocket. Agnes nodded, her gaze softening. "That dog's something else. Eleanor's dog, I reckon. She was my friend, you know, back when we nursed together." Clara leaned forward, pulse quickening. "Eleanor Hayes. Did she have someone special?" Agnes's smile faded, her hands folding tightly. "There was a boy, long ago, a soldier. She wore a locket for him, never took it off. But he didn't come back." Clara's breath caught. The locket seemed to pulse, a heartbeat of its own. She wanted to show it to Agnes, to confirm it was Eleanor's, but something held her back, fear of exposing a wound still raw. "What happened to him?" she asked instead. Agnes shrugged, her eyes distant. "Korea, I think. Eleanor never talked much after. Just worked, cared for folks. I figured the dog was her last companion." The vagueness frustrated Clara, but Agnes's tone carried grief, a warning not to push. "She deserved better," Agnes added, standing. "Maybe that dog's making sure she's not forgotten." Clara watched Agnes leave, her tea cooling untouched. The soldier, the locket, Rusty, it all fit, yet gaps remained. She paid her bill and headed for Willow Grove, the harbor's gray waves mirroring her thoughts. The cemetery was quieter now, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pines. Rusty was there, as always, lying by Eleanor's grave, his fur dappled with light. Clara slowed, her heart easing at the sight of him. He lifted his head, meeting her gaze, and she felt a pang of responsibility. The locket wasn't hers to keep. It belonged to Rusty's story, to Eleanor's memory. A soft sob broke her thoughts. Near a fresh grave, a girl no older than 8 knelt, her dark braids swinging as she arranged daisies. Clara hesitated, then approached, recognizing the child from Ruth's stories, Sophie, who'd lost her grandfather. Rusty, unnoticed until now, had risen and padded over, settling beside Sophie. He didn't touch her, didn't whine, just sat. His presence a quiet anchor. Sophie looked up, her eyes red but steady, and placed a single daisy by Rusty's paw. "Thank you, doggy," she whispered, her voice small but clear. Rusty nudged her hand, gentle as a breeze, and Clara's throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. Sophie's mother called from the path, and the girl stood, brushing dirt from her knees. She glanced at Rusty one last time, a smile flickering, then ran off, leaving the daisy behind. Clara watched, rooted, as Rusty returned to Eleanor's grave, the flower untouched. It was a small act, yet it carried weight, a sign of Rusty's reach beyond Eleanor. Clara pulled out her notebook, sketching the daisy, its petals stark against the grass. Sophie's gesture felt like a thread, one she'd follow, just as she'd follow the locket's trail. The sky darkened, clouds rolling in from the sea, and Clara shivered, her coat too thin for the sudden chill. She looked at Rusty, his form almost blending with the headstone. "You're more than you seem, aren't you?" she murmured, half expecting an answer. He blinked, slow and deliberate, as if guarding his secrets. Clara's fingers closed around the locket, its edges worn smooth. She'd meant to ask Henry about Rusty today, but Sophie's moment had shifted her focus. Tomorrow she'd find him, press for details. How long Rusty had been here, who fed him, why no one claimed him. As she turned to leave, a gust swept through, rattling the pines. Clara glanced back, and Rusty was watching her, his gaze a tether across the distance. The air felt charged, heavy with coming rain, and she hurried toward the gate, her steps quickening. A storm was brewing, not just in the sky, but in her heart. A sense that Rusty's story held dangers, emotional perhaps, but real. She needed to know more, not just for him, but for herself, for the part of her that still believed in stories with endings that healed. The wind howled over Boothbay Harbor, rattling Clara Thompson's cottage windows as a nor'easter brewed. She'd barely slept, her dreams tangled with Rusty's soulful eyes and the locket's cold weight in her pocket. Eleanor Hayes's story, nurse, lover, loner, had rooted itself in Clara's mind, and the dog's vigil at Willow Grove Cemetery felt like a call she couldn't ignore. At 68, Clara knew storms like this could turn treacherous, and the thought of Rusty out there, exposed, gnawed at her. She pulled on her raincoat, grabbed a flashlight, and headed into the gale, driven by a need to ensure he was safe. The harbor was a blur of gray, waves crashing against the docks as Clara fought her way to Willow Grove. Rain stung her face, soaking her scarf, and the cemetery gate groaned under the wind's assault. Inside, the pines swayed, their needles littering the paths like fallen stars. Clara's beam swept the grounds, her heart lurching as she reached Eleanor's grave. There was Rusty, curled tight against the headstone, his fur matted and slick, shivering in the downpour. His eyes met hers, weary but unyielding, and Clara's chest tightened. He hadn't moved, hadn't sought shelter, as if Eleanor's side was the only place he belonged. "Rusty, you stubborn thing," Clara whispered, kneeling despite the mud soaking her knees. She reached out hesitant, and he leaned into her touch, his warmth faint against the storm's chill. She couldn't leave him like this, not in this weather, not when he looked so frail. The cemetery was empty, no sign of Henry Brooks, but Clara remembered the gardener's shed near the gate. A squat building with a tin roof. It wasn't much, but it was dry. She coaxed Rusty to his feet, her voice soft but firm, and he followed, slow and unsteady, his loyalty to Eleanor bending just enough to let Clara lead. The shed smelled of earth and motor oil, its walls lined with rakes and shovels. Clara spread an old tarp on the floor, urging Rusty to lie down, and found a blanket in a corner, musty but thick. She draped it over him, her hands trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of his trust. He settled, eyes half closed, and Clara sat beside him, catching her breath. The storm raged outside, a relentless roar, but here, in this dim space, there was a fragile calm. She thought of Tom, how he'd have been out here with her, probably joking about adopting the dog already. Footsteps crunched outside, and the door swung open, revealing Henry Brooks, his raincoat dripping. "Clara, what in blazes are you doing out here?" His voice was gruff, but his eyes softened when he saw Rusty. "Found him, did you?" Clara nodded, brushing wet hair from her face. "He was freezing by Eleanor's grave. I couldn't leave him." Henry crouched, checking Rusty's blanket. Stubborn old boy. Been like this since Eleanor passed. Won't budge no matter what we try. Tried to take him to the shelter once, but he slipped right back here by morning. Clara listened, her curiosity flaring. "How long has he been here, Henry?" "Since her funeral." Henry rubbed his chin, rain dripping from his cap. "Near enough. Showed up a day or two after, skinny as a rail, but dead set on that grave. We figured he was hers, though no one saw her with a dog before. Folks stopped fighting him. Let him stay. Clara's fingers brushed the locket in her pocket, its shape a silent question. Did Eleanor ever mention someone special? A soldier, maybe? Henry's brow furrowed, but he shook his head. Not to me. She was private, Eleanor. Kept her heart close. The shed door rattled, and a new voice cut through the storm's din. Henry, you in there? A man stepped inside, tall and stern, his coat embossed with the town seal. Clara recognized Daniel Ward, a counselor known for his no-nonsense ways. His eyes narrowed at Rusty. This the dog folks are talking about doesn't belong in a cemetery, Henry. It's against regulations. Clara bristled, her voice sharp. He's not hurting anyone, Mr. Ward. Look at him. He's barely holding on. Daniel's jaw tightened. Rules are rules, Mrs. Thompson. This isn't a pet shelter. Henry stood, his tone even. He's been here a year, Dan. Hurts no one, helps plenty. Ask Ruth Carver, ask half the town. Daniel scoffed, but his gaze lingered on Rusty, who'd lifted his head at Eleanor's name, ears twitching. Clara caught it, her pulse quickening. Rusty knew that name, felt it, even now. Daniel turned to leave, pausing at the door. I'll bring it to the council. Don't say I didn't warn you. The door slammed, and Clara's stomach knotted. A fight was coming, one she hadn't anticipated. Rusty shifted, nudging Clara's hand, his nose warm despite the cold. She stroked his fur, her resolve hardening. You're not going anywhere, are you? She said, half to him, half to herself. Henry sighed, settling on a crate. He's got a will of iron, that one. But Dan's stubborn, too. Might be trouble. Clara nodded, the locket's weight grounding her. She'd protect Rusty, find out who Eleanor was, why this dog stayed. But the storm outside wasn't letting up, and Rusty's shivering hadn't stopped. Clara looked at Henry, her voice steady. Can he stay here tonight? Henry grunted agreement, fetching another blanket. I'll check on him come morning. But Clara wasn't ready to leave. She thought of her cottage, warm but empty, and then of Rusty, alone in this shed. I'll take him home, she said, surprising herself. Just for tonight, till the storm passes. Henry raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Rusty's eyes met hers, trusting, and Clara knew she'd crossed a line. Into his world, Eleanor's world. A story she couldn't walk away from. Clara Thompson woke to the patter of rain on her cottage roof. The nor'easter's fury softened to a drizzle over Boothbay Harbor. The gray-muzzled dog, Rusty, lay on a quilt by her hearth, his breathing shallow but steady. She'd brought him here last night from Willow Grove Cemetery, unable to leave him shivering in Henry's shed. At 68, Clara wasn't one for rash decisions, but Rusty's trust, those deep, knowing eyes, had stirred something in her, a need to protect him from the storm and the threat of Daniel Ward's rules. The locket, tucked in her coat pocket, pressed against her thoughts. Its E.H. door initials, whispering Eleanor Hayes's untold story. Morning light filtered through the cottage's salt-streaked windows, casting shadows on the hardwood floor. Clara knelt beside Rusty, her knees creaking, and stroked his damp fur. He stirred, blinking up at her, but his restlessness was clear. Pacing near the door, glancing toward the harbor as if Eleanor's grave called him back. Clara's heart ached. This wasn't his home, not really. She brewed coffee, its bitter aroma filling the air, and tried to coax Rusty with a bowl of leftovers. He sniffed but didn't eat, his gaze fixed on the world beyond her walls. You're a stubborn one, she murmured, half smiling, though worry gnawed at her. The cottage felt too quiet, its shelves of books and Tom's old fishing gear silent witnesses to her solitude. Clara hadn't meant to get so entangled. Rusty was just a dog, Eleanor just a name, but the locket, Agnes's hints of a lost soldier, and Rusty's vigil had woven a thread she couldn't cut. She sat at her table, notebook open, and flipped through a poetry collection, a habit from her marriage. Tom used to tease her, saying she read Frost like scripture. On impulse, she opened to "Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening," and read aloud, her voice soft. "Whose woods these are, I think I know." Rusty's pacing stopped. He settled near her, ears twitching as if the words anchored him. Clara paused, her throat tight. The poem had been Tom's favorite, a ritual they'd shared on winter nights. Rusty's attention felt like a bridge to that past, a fleeting warmth in her grief. She read on, her voice steadying, and Rusty lay down, his eyes half closed. For a moment, the cottage wasn't so empty, the harbor's gray expanse less daunting. Clara reached for her notebook, jotting down "Rusty likes poetry," a small absurd note that grounded her. She'd return him to Willow Grove soon, but first she needed to understand why he stayed, what tied him to Eleanor. A knock at the door startled her. Clara rose, smoothing her sweater, and found Ruth Carver on the porch, her gray hair damp under a hood. "Clara, I heard you took that dog in," Ruth said, stepping inside. Her eyes, lined with years of loss, softened at Rusty. "Goodness, he looks better already." Clara offered tea, grateful for company. Ruth sat cradling her mug and shared how Rusty had helped her after her daughter's death. "I'd sit by Ellen's grave falling apart, and he'd just be there, quiet as you please," made the pain lighter somehow. Clara nodded, her own loneliness mirrored in Ruth's words. Ruth sipped her tea, glancing at the poetry book. "You're digging into Eleanor's story, aren't you?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Clara hesitated, then nodded, the locket's weight urging her on. "I found something, a locket, marked E.H. Agnes mentioned a soldier Eleanor loved. I think it's his." Ruth's eyes widened, but she didn't press. Eleanor was private, but kind. If that dog's hers, there's a reason he stays. Keep looking, Clara. You've got a knack for it. Clara managed a smile, Ruth's encouragement a spark in the fog of her doubts. Their talk turned to Daniel Ward, the counselor pushing to remove Rusty. Ruth's face hardened. "He's got no heart, that man. Thinks a cemetery's just rules and grass. Henry's worried, says Daniel's calling a meeting soon." Clara's stomach twisted. She'd seen Daniel's coldness in the shed, his dismissal of Rusty's place in Willow Grove. "We can't let him win," she said, surprising herself with the edge in her voice. Ruth nodded, resolute. "We won't. That dog's done more for this town than Daniel ever will." Ruth left as the rain eased, promising to check on Clara tomorrow. Alone again, Clara turned to her poetry book, its pages worn from years of touch. She flipped idly, and a loose photograph slipped out, a faded image of a young couple, the woman's face strikingly like Eleanor's, smiling beside a man in uniform. Clara's breath caught. It wasn't hers, wasn't Tom's. How had it ended up here? The book had been a library discard, one she'd kept for its notes in the margins. Had Eleanor owned it once, left this piece of her past? The soldier's eyes, bright and hopeful, echoed Agnes's story, and Clara's fingers trembled as she tucked the photo back. Rusty whined, breaking her trance. He stood by the door, pawing gently, his restlessness sharper now. Clara understood. He needed Willow Grove, needed Eleanor. She couldn't keep him here, not when his heart was elsewhere. But the photo, the locket, Daniel's threat. They swirled in her mind, a storm of their own. She grabbed her coat, leashing Rusty with a scarf for safety, and opened the door. The harbor air was damp, carrying the scent of seaweed and pine. "Let's go home," she told him, her voice firm despite the ache in her chest. They walked toward Willow Grove, Rusty's steps slow but eager. Clara's thoughts raced. The photo was a clue, one she'd follow, maybe with Agnes's help. But Daniel's shadow loomed, a challenge she hadn't sought. She glanced at Rusty, his fur catching the faint sun, and felt a surge of purpose. He wasn't just a dog. He was a story, a promise. And Clara was part of it now. As they neared the cemetery gate, Rusty pulled forward, leading her back to Eleanor's grave, back to the mystery she'd unravel, no matter what stood in the way. Clara Thompson stood at the edge of Eleanor Hayes's grave in Willow Grove Cemetery, the October air sharp with the scent of pine and earth. Rusty, the gray-muzzled dog, had led her back, here after a restless night in her cottage, his steps surer despite the frailty in his bones. At 68, Clara felt the weight of her own years, but the photograph she'd found, a young Eleanor with a soldier, burned in her mind, alongside the locket's E.H. initials. They were pieces of a puzzle, and Rusty's vigil was the heart of it. She knelt, her coat brushing the grass, searching for anything else Eleanor might have left behind. The cemetery was quiet, its headstone softened by morning mist rolling in from Boothbay Harbor. Rusty settled beside the grave, his eyes fixed on the etched lily, as if guarding a secret. Clara's fingers traced the soil, cool and damp, until they brushed something hard, a rusted tin box half buried under leaves. Her pulse quickened. She pried it open, revealing a single letter, its paper yellowed but intact, folded tightly. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and Clara's breath caught as she read the first line. "My dearest James, if you ever read this..." Her hands trembled, but she slipped the letter into her pocket, glancing at Rusty. He watched her, calm but expectant, as if he'd known it was there. Clara stood, the harbor's distant gulls crying overhead. The letter felt alive, a voice from Eleanor's past, and she couldn't read it here. Not yet. It was too private, too raw, meant for a soldier who'd never returned. She thought of Agnes Miller's words at the cafe, the hint of a love lost in Korea. This had to be it. Eleanor's heart poured onto paper, entrusted to the earth where Rusty now stood sentinel. Clara stroked his fur, her voice low. "You knew, didn't you?" Rusty leaned into her touch, his warmth a quiet answer. Footsteps crunched nearby, and Clara turned to see an older man approaching a grave 2 rows over. James, a widower in his 70s, moved slowly, his scarf loose against the chill. Clara had seen him before, always alone, always silent. Today, Rusty rose, padding toward him with a grace that belied his age. James paused, startled, then knelt as Rusty sat beside him, close but not touching. The man's shoulders sagged, his hand resting on the grass, and Clara saw a tear glint on his cheek. Rusty stayed, unmoving, until James stood, his face softer as if a burden had lifted. "Good dog," James muttered, his voice rough, before walking away. Clara's throat tightened, her notebook forgotten in her pocket. Rusty's gift wasn't just loyalty to Eleanor, it was this. A silent comfort to strangers, a bridge across their pain. She thought of Sophie, the girl who'd left a daisy, and Ruth, who'd found solace in Rusty's presence. He was more than a dog. He was Willow Grove's heartbeat. And Clara felt a fierce need to protect him, especially from Daniel Ward's threat to remove him. The letter in her pocket seemed heavier now, a responsibility she wasn't sure she could bear. She left Rusty by Eleanor's grave and headed for the Boothbay Harbor Historical Society, a squat building near the harbor's edge. The letter deserved context, and Agnes might know more. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and varnish. Agnes was there, sorting papers, her gray curls catching the light. "Clara, you're back," she said, smiling but curious. Clara hesitated, then pulled out the letter, keeping it folded. "I found this by Eleanor's grave. It's personal, about a soldier." Agnes's eyes widened and she gestured to a chair. "Sit. Let's talk." Over tea, Agnes shared what she knew. Eleanor loved a boy named James. Not your James, mind you. He was her fiancé, drafted for Korea in '52. Never came back. She wore that locket always, said it held his promise. After he died, she closed up, poured herself into nursing. Clara listened, the letter's weight growing. "Did she have a dog?" she asked. Agnes shook her head. "Not that I saw, but Eleanor had a way with strays, human or animal. That dog of hers, he's like her, isn't he? Always there for someone." Clara nodded, her thoughts on Rusty, on the tin box, on a love that hadn't faded. As Clara left, the harbor sparkled under a clearing sky, but her mind was clouded. The letter was Eleanor's confession, maybe her goodbye, and Rusty had guarded it as fiercely as he guarded her grave. Clara needed to read it, to understand, but fear held her back. What if it was too much, too close to her own loss? She thought of Tom, his laugh, his absence, and wondered if Eleanor had felt this same hollow ache. Back at Willow Grove, she'd check on Rusty, maybe find Henry, ask about Daniel's plans. The counselor's threat wasn't idle, and Clara sensed a fight brewing, one that could change everything. On her way, she passed a schoolyard where children played, their laughter sharp against the sea's murmur. A girl, Sophie, she realized, sat apart, sketching in a notebook. Clara slowed, catching a glimpse of a dog in crayon, gray and soulful, unmistakably Rusty. Sophie looked up, smiling shyly, and Clara's heart lifted. That drawing was a sign, a spark of something bigger. She waved, then hurried on, the letter and locket grounding her steps. Rusty was waiting, and so was Eleanor's story. But Daniel Ward's shadow loomed, a storm Clara would face head-on. Clara Thompson clutched her coat against the October chill as she entered Boothbay Harbor's town hall, the murmur of voices swelling like the harbor's tide. The letter from Eleanor Hayes's grave, a confession of love to a soldier lost in Korea, burned in her pocket, its words intertwining with Rusty's steadfast vigil at Willow Grove Cemetery. At 68, Clara hadn't planned to fight battles, but Daniel Ward's push to remove Rusty, the gray-muzzled dog who comforted mourners, had stirred a fire in her. Tonight's council meeting was her chance to protect him, to honor Eleanor's legacy, and to find her own voice in a town that felt both home and foreign since Tom's death. The hall smelled of coffee and polished wood, its benches filled with fishermen, shopkeepers, and retirees, their faces lit by fluorescent glow. Clara spotted Ruth Carver near the front, her gray hair pinned tightly, her eyes fierce with purpose. Henry Brooks, the cemetery gardener, sat beside her, his cap twisting in his hands. Clara slid in next to them, her heart pounding. She'd read Eleanor's letter last night, its ache for a man named James echoing her own loss, and it had steeled her. Rusty wasn't just a dog, he was proof that love endured, and Clara wouldn't let Daniel erase that. The council president called order, and Daniel Ward stood, his suit crisp against the room's worn warmth. "Folks, we've got a problem at Willow Grove." he began, his voice clipped. A stray dog's taken up residence, disrupting the cemetery's dignity. Regulations are clear. No animals allowed without oversight. I propose we relocate it to the shelter. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others frowning. Clara's stomach knotted. Daniel's words were cold, blind to Rusty's quiet miracles. She glanced at Ruth, who whispered, "He doesn't get it, but they might." Henry leaned forward, his voice gruff. "That dog's no stray, Dan. Been there a year since Eleanor Hayes passed. Hurts nobody, helps plenty." A woman in the back nodded, her scarf bright against her coat. "He sat with me when I buried my sister," she called. "Made it bearable." Clara's pulse quickened. Others saw Rusty's worth, felt his presence. But Daniel raised a hand, unmoved. "Sentiment's fine, but rules aren't. Cemeteries aren't for pets. We vote next week, and I expect sense to prevail." His tone was final, a gavel in itself, and Clara's hands clenched. Ruth squeezed Clara's arm, urging her to stand. Clara hesitated, her librarian's instinct for quiet warring with a need to speak. She thought of Rusty's eyes, of Eleanor's letter, of Sophie's daisy left in the grass. At 68, she'd spent years shelving stories, but this one demanded her voice. She rose, legs unsteady, and cleared her throat. "Mr. Ward, I'm Clara Thompson. That dog, Rusty, isn't a pet. He's a guardian. He stays by Eleanor Hayes' grave, never begging, never harming. He walks with mourners, sits with the grieving. I've seen him ease a child's tears, soften a widower's pain. He doesn't judge, he loves. Isn't that worth more than any rule?" The room stilled, eyes on Clara. She felt exposed, her words raw, but she pressed on. "Eleanor was alone when she died, but Rusty's made sure she's not forgotten. He's made Willow Grove more than a place of loss. It's a place of healing. If you take him away, you're taking that too." Her voice cracked, thinking of Tom, of her own visits to his grave, Rusty's gaze a silent anchor. She sat, breathless, as whispers spread. Ruth's hand found hers, warm and firm. "Well done," she murmured. A man stood, his beard flecked with gray. "She's right. That dog was there when I buried my dad. Felt like he understood." Another voice chimed in, then another. Stories of Rusty's comfort weaving a tapestry of defiance. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt, his confidence fraying. Clara's hope flickered. Maybe they could sway the vote, keep Rusty safe. But she saw doubt in some faces, neighbors swayed by order over heart. The president called for calm, promising discussion next week, and the meeting adjourned, leaving tension thick as fog. Outside, the harbor's salt air cooled Clara's cheeks. Ruth and Henry joined her, their breath visible in the dusk. "You spoke from the soul," Henry said, his cap back on. "Might have turned some heads." Clara managed a smile, but Daniel's resolve worried her. He'd fight harder now, she sensed, and a week wasn't long to rally support. As they walked toward the harbor, Clara noticed a bulletin board by the hall, covered in children's drawings. One caught her eye, a crayon sketch of a gray dog, soulful and unmistakable, signed Sophie. Her heart lifted. Sophie, the girl from the cemetery, was spreading Rusty's story, a spark Clara hadn't expected. Ruth followed her gaze, smiling. "That girl's got fire. Saw her teacher pinning those up. Kids love that dog." Clara nodded, the drawing a beacon in her doubt. Sophie's art could reach hearts Daniel's rules couldn't. Maybe even sway the council. She thought of Eleanor's letter, its plea for love across time, and felt Rusty's story growing beyond the grave. "We need to fight," Clara said, her voice steady. "For Rusty, for Eleanor, Henry grunted agreement and Ruth's eyes gleamed. "We will, Clara, count on it." The harbor lights twinkled as they parted, but Clara's mind stayed on Willow Grove. Rusty was there now, she knew, lying by Eleanor's grave, unaware of the battle brewing. Daniel's threat loomed, but so did Sophie's drawings, Ruth's resolve, Henry's loyalty. Clara's steps slowed, the letter's weight grounding her. Tomorrow she'd check on Rusty, maybe find Sophie, see how far those sketches had spread. The fight was just beginning, and Clara was ready. Whether for Rusty's sake or her own, she couldn't yet say. Clara Thompson's boots crunched on the frost-kissed grass of Willow Grove Cemetery, her breath clouding in the early November chill. The harbor's gray waves churned beyond Boothbay Harbor's pines. But her focus was on Rusty, the gray-muzzled dog who'd collapsed by Eleanor Hayes's grave just hours ago. At 68, Clara had faced loss. Tom's death still ached. But Rusty's sudden weakness struck deeper, a mirror to her own fragility. She'd spoken for him at the town meeting, defying Daniel Ward's push to remove him. And now as she hurried toward Henry Brooks, her heart raced with fear that she might lose him before the fight was won. Henry stood by Eleanor's headstone, his cap low, watching Rusty struggle to rise. The dog's eyes, once bright with purpose, were dim, his ribs stark under matted fur. Clara knelt, her coat catching on the granite, and stroked his flank. "Oh, Rusty," she whispered, her voice catching. He leaned into her touch, faint but trusting, and Clara's chest tightened. She thought of Eleanor's letter, its love for a soldier lost forever, and wondered if Rusty's loyalty was costing him his life. "We need a vet," she said, looking to Henry. His nod was grim. "Already called Emily Stone. She's on her way." The cemetery was silent, its headstones dusted with frost, but Clara felt eyes on her, not Rusty's, but the town's, waiting for the council's vote in days. Sophie's crayon drawings of Rusty had spread, pinned to shop windows and school boards, turning him into a quiet legend. Clara had seen them yesterday, vibrant sketches that caught his soulful gaze, and they'd fueled her hope. But now with Rusty trembling, hope felt fragile. Henry crouched beside her, his hands rough from years of tending graves. "He's tough, Clara. Been through worse. But he's old. Older than we thought." A pickup truck rattled through the gate, and Dr. Emily Stone, a wiry woman in her 40s, stepped out, her vet bag slung over one shoulder. Her boots left prints in the frost as she approached, her face calm but focused. "Let's see him," she said, kneeling by Rusty. She checked his pulse, his gums, her hands gentle but sure. Clara watched, her fingers twisting the locket in her pocket, its EH initials a silent prayer. Emily frowned, listening through her stethoscope. "He's dehydrated, weak. Age, mostly. No major illness, but he needs rest, warmth, food. Can you keep him indoors?" Clara hesitated, remembering Rusty's restlessness in her cottage. "He hates being away from here," she said, glancing at Eleanor's grave. Emily nodded, understanding. "Then we'll do what we can here. I'll set up fluids, but he's got to eat." She worked quickly, rigging a drip from her bag, while Henry fetched a blanket from his shed. Clara stayed close, her thoughts drifting to Tom's final days, his slow fade, her helplessness. She pushed the memory down, focusing on Rusty's shallow breaths, willing him to hold on. As Emily finished, a small crowd gathered near the gate, locals drawn by word of Rusty's collapse. Clara recognized faces from the meeting, their murmurs soft but urgent. Among them was a girl, Sophie, clutching a notebook, her braids swinging as she edged closer. Her eyes, wide with worry, locked on Rusty, and Clara felt a pang. Sophie's drawings had given Rusty a voice, and now she was here, a child caught at a grown-up fight. Clara waved her over, and Sophie knelt, her small hand hovering near Rusty. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked, voice trembling. "He's fighting," Clara said, forcing a smile. Sophie nodded, pulling a sketch from her notebook. A new one, Rusty under a tree, radiant with light. "For him," she whispered, tucking it by the blanket. Clara's throat closed, Sophie's faith a spark in the cold. Emily glanced up, her expression softening. "That's beautiful, kiddo. He's lucky to have you." Sophie blushed, but her eyes stayed on Rusty as if her drawing could heal him. The crowd parted, and Clara's stomach dropped as Daniel Ward approached, his coat too neat for the muddy path. He'd fought to banish Rusty, called him a stray, but now he stopped short, his face unreadable. "Heard he was down," Daniel said, his voice low. Henry bristled, but Clara spoke first, steady despite her fear. "He's not giving up, Mr. Ward. Neither are we." Daniel's gaze flicked to Rusty, then Sophie's sketch, and something shifted, a crack in his resolve. He crouched, awkward, and petted Rusty's head, his hand lingering. "Didn't mean for this," he muttered, almost to himself before standing and walking away. Clara exhaled, hope flickering anew. Daniel's gesture, small as it was, hinted at change, a chance to sway the vote. She thought of Eleanor's letter, its plea across decades, and saw Rusty as its echo, binding them all, her, Henry, Sophie, even Daniel. Emily packed her bag, leaving instructions for care. "He's stable for now," she said. "Keep him warm-fed. I'll check tomorrow." Clara nodded, her mind racing. Rusty needed more than blankets. He needed Willow Grove, Eleanor, his purpose. As the crowd dispersed, Clara stayed, Sophie's sketch glowing against the frost. Rusty's eyes opened, faint but clear, meeting hers. She thought of Agnes, of the soldier, of a story still unfolding. Tomorrow, she'd seek answers, maybe from a stranger tied to Eleanor's past. But tonight, Rusty's fight was enough, a spark to carry them forward, into a battle that felt bigger than one dog, one grave, one town. Clara Thompson walked the frost-dusted paths of Willow Grove Cemetery, the November air sharp against her cheeks. Rusty, the gray-muzzled dog, rested by Eleanor Hayes's grave, his breathing steadier after Dr. Emily Stone's care yesterday. At 68, Clara felt the weight of each step, her thoughts tangled with Eleanor's letter, a love lost to war, and Sophie's vibrant drawings, now rallying Boothbay Harbor to save Rusty from Daniel Ward's council vote. The locket in her pocket, etched with E.H., seemed to pulse, urging her toward answers. She'd come to check on Rusty, but a figure by Eleanor's headstone stopped her. A stranger, old and stooped, tracing the carved lily with a trembling hand. The man, in his 80s, wore a wool coat frayed at the cuffs, his eyes shadowed by a fedora. Clara approached, her boots soft on the grass, and cleared her throat. "Excuse me, sir, did you know Eleanor?" He turned, his face etched with lines like a harbor map, and nodded. "Thomas Reed," he said, voice low. "Her nephew. Only family she had left." Clara's heart skipped. She hadn't expected this, not after Agnes called Eleanor solitary. Thomas's gaze fell on Rusty, softening. "That's her dog, isn't it? Saw him last time I visited, right after her funeral." Clara knelt beside Rusty, stroking his fur, warm under her fingers. "He's Rusty," she said. "Never leaves her side." Thomas smiled, faint but warm. "Sounds like Aunt Eleanor. Always taking in strays, people, animals, didn't matter." He pulled a locket from his pocket, identical to Clara's, its E.H. glinting. "She gave me this before she passed. Said it was for someone to remember her by." Clara's breath caught, her own locket heavy in her hand. She showed it to Thomas, her voice unsteady. "I found this by her grave. Thought it was hers." Thomas's eyes widened, tracing both lockets. "She had two, you know. One for her, one for him. James, her fiancé, lost in Korea." Clara nodded, Eleanor's letter flashing in her mind, its words of longing now vivid. Thomas sat on a nearby bench, gesturing for Clara to join him. "She found that dog a year before she died," he said. "Half dead on the road, ribs like a cage. Nursed him back, called him her shadow. Told me if anything happened to her, he'd need someone to love him." Clara's throat tightened, Rusty's vigil suddenly clearer. A debt repaid, a promise kept. The cemetery hummed with quiet life. Gulls overhead, pines rustling in the breeze. Clara thought of Sophie's sketches, of Ruth's resolve, of Daniel's unexpected softness when he petted Rusty yesterday. "He's loved," she said, her voice firm, "by half the town now. But there's a man, Daniel Ward, trying to take him away." Thomas's jaw set, his eyes sharp. "Let me talk to this Ward." "Eleanor wouldn't stand for it, and neither will I." Clara hesitated, then nodded, hope flickering. Thomas's connection to Eleanor could shift the tide, maybe sway Daniel before the vote. They walked to Clara's cottage, the harbor's salt air mingling with wood smoke. Inside, Clara brewed tea, the kettle's whistle cutting the silence. Thomas sat by the hearth, studying a photo of Eleanor and James she'd kept from the poetry book. "She never forgot him," he said, voice thick. "Kept that locket close, like he was still here." Clara poured tea, her hands steady despite the ache in her chest. Tom's absence lingered in her own quiet spaces, but Eleanor's story, and Rusty's, gave her purpose. "Rusty's keeping her alive," she said, "for all of us." A knock interrupted them. Clara opened the door to find Sophie, her braids swinging, a new drawing clutched in her hands. "Mrs. Thompson, I made this for Rusty," she said, shy but eager. The sketch showed Rusty with angel wings glowing against a starry sky, his eyes as soulful as ever. Clara's breath caught, and Thomas leaned forward, smiling. "That's him, all right," he said. Sophie beamed, her cheeks pink. "My teacher says everyone's talking about him now. They're putting my pictures in the paper." Clara hugged her, the girl's warmth a spark against the cold. Thomas stood, his fedora back on. "I'll find this Daniel Ward tomorrow," he promised. "Tell him about Eleanor, about Rusty. He's got to understand." Clara nodded, grateful but wary. Daniel's change of heart wasn't certain, and the vote loomed. Sophie slipped her drawing into Clara's hand, whispering, "For Rusty's bed," before darting off. Clara tucked it away, its colors bright against her doubts. She saw Thomas out, the harbor lights twinkling as dusk fell, and felt a shift. A story unfolding beyond her control. Back inside, Clara sat by the window, Eleanor's letter and Sophie's sketch side by side. Rusty was safe for now, but winter was coming, fierce and unforgiving. She thought of Thomas's words, of Eleanor saving a stray, of Rusty's refusal to leave her grave. The locket, the letter, the drawings. They were threads in a tapestry, and Clara was woven in whether she'd chosen it or not. Tomorrow she'd return to Willow Grove, check on Rusty, maybe face Daniel herself. But tonight, Sophie's angel wings glowed in her mind, a sign that Rusty's fight, and hers, was far from over. The blizzard roared over Boothbay Harbor, cloaking Willow Grove Cemetery in a veil of snow that stung Clara Thompson's face. She trudged through the storm, her flashlight's beams swallowed by swirling white, her heart pounding with dread. Rusty, the gray-muzzled dog who guarded Eleanor Hayes's grave, had vanished into the night, his frail form no match for this brutal cold. At 68, Clara felt every gust as a personal challenge, But Thomas Reed's words yesterday, Eleanor's wish for Rusty to be loved, drove her forward. She wasn't alone. Ruth Carver and Henry Brooks flanked her, their shouts for Rusty lost in the wind's howl. The cemetery's pines groaned, their branches heavy with ice, and Clara's boots sank into drifts that hid the familiar paths. She'd checked Eleanor's grave first, hoping Rusty had stayed but found only an empty hollow where his warmth should have been. Panic clawed at her. Rusty's collapse days ago, his slow recovery under Dr. Emily Stone's care, made this absence dire. Clara thought of Sophie's angel wing drawing, of Eleanor's letter confessing love across decades, and tightened her scarf. Rusty was more than a dog. He was their tether, and she wouldn't let him go. Henry's voice cut through the gale, hoarse but urgent. "Over here, Clara!" She stumbled toward his lantern, Ruth close behind, and found him by a cluster of headstones near the cemetery's edge. Rusty lay there, a dark shape against Eleanor's grave, his fur crusted with snow, eyes half open. Clara dropped to her knees, her gloves brushing ice from his muzzle. "Rusty, oh God, hold on," she whispered, her voice breaking. He stirred, faint but alive, and Clara's relief battled fear. He was too cold, too weak, and the storm showed no mercy. Ruth's hands joined hers, wrapping Rusty in a blanket from Henry's shed. "We've got to get him inside," she said, her gray hair plastered to her face. Henry nodded, pointing to the shed nearby, its tin roof rattling. They lifted Rusty together, his body lighter than Clara expected, and fought their way through the drifts. The shed's door banged open, revealing a dim space smelling of earth and oil. Clara laid Rusty on a tarp, her fingers numb as she tucked the blanket tighter. His breath was shallow, each rise of his chest a fragile hope. Henry lit a lantern, its glow casting shadows on the walls. "He's tough, but this—" He trailed off, his cap shadowing his eyes. Clara shook her head, refusing despair. She thought of Tom, his final days, and pushed the memory aside. Rusty wasn't Tom. He had a town behind him, a story to finish. On impulse, she hummed a lullaby, one she'd sung to calm Rusty in her cottage, its melody soft against the storm's roar. "Hush now, my darling," she sang, her voice trembling but clear. Rusty's eyes flickered, meeting hers, and he shifted, nudging her hand with a warmth that broke her heart. Ruth knelt, her hand steady despite the cold. "He hears you, Clara. Keep going." Clara sang on, the words a lifeline, and Rusty's breathing eased, slow but stronger. Henry rummaged in a corner, finding a thermos of coffee, its steam a small defiance against the freeze. They shared it, huddling close, the shed a cocoon in the chaos. Clara's thoughts drifted to Sophie, whose drawings had sparked a fund to save Rusty, now spreading online. She imagined the girl's face, bright with hope, and vowed to tell her Rusty was fighting, no matter what came next. The door creaked, and Clara startled as Daniel Ward stepped in, snow caking his coat. His face, usually stern, was etched with something softer. Guilt, perhaps. He carried a stack of blankets, his boots leaving puddles. "Heard he was missing," he said, voice low. "Figured you'd need these." Clara blinked, caught off guard. Daniel, who'd fought to banish Rusty, now stood here, offering aid. Henry took the blankets, gruff but grateful, and wrapped one around Rusty, who sighed under the weight. Daniel crouched, his hand hesitant, then rested on Rusty's flank. "Didn't think he'd matter this much," he muttered, almost to himself. Clara's anger flared, then faded. Daniel's gesture, small but real, was a crack in his armor, a sign the town's love for Rusty had reached him. She thought of Thomas, Eleanor's nephew, promising to confront Daniel, and wondered if this was his doing, or Sophie's, or theirs combined. He matters to all of us, she said, her voice steady. Daniel nodded, standing and left without another word, the storm swallowing his steps. Clara exhaled, hope rekindling. The vote was days away, and Daniel's change could tip the scales, keep Rusty where he belonged. Ruth squeezed Clara's shoulder, her eyes bright. He's brought us together, hasn't he? Clara nodded, her gaze on Rusty, now curled tighter, his warmth returning. Henry stoked a small heater, its hum a promise of safety. Clara thought of Eleanor's locket, its twin held by Thomas, and felt Rusty's story nearing a peak. Tomorrow they'd plan, a memorial maybe to seal Rusty's place, but tonight they'd saved him, and that was enough. The blizzard raged on, but inside, Rusty's breath held steady, a beacon for what lay ahead. Clara Thompson stood in the spring light of Willow Grove Cemetery, the scent of blooming lilacs mingling with Boothbay Harbor's salt air. Rusty, the gray-muzzled dog, lay by Eleanor Hayes's grave, his fur catching the sun, though his movements were slower now, each breath a quiet labor. At 68, Clara felt time's weight too, but the blizzard's terror, Rusty's near loss, had forged a resolve in her. Sophie's drawings, Thomas Reed's revelations about Eleanor's love, and Daniel Ward's unexpected aid had rallied the town. Today Clara would propose a memorial to keep Rusty here forever, a testament to the dog who'd healed them all. The cemetery hummed with early visitors, their steps soft on paths still damp from winter's thaw. Clara met Henry Brooks by the gate, his gardener's hands clutching a thermos of coffee. Ruth Carver joined them, her gray hair loose, her eyes bright with purpose. "Ready for this?" Ruth asked, nodding toward the community center where they'd pitched the plan. Clara smoothed her coat, the locket, with E.H. safe in her pocket, and nodded. Eleanor's letter, Sophie's art, Rusty's vigil, they were her strength, and she'd need it to face the council, even with Daniel's softening stance. They walked to the center, a squat building overlooking the harbor's glinting waves. Inside, locals filled the chairs, their murmurs warm with talk of Rusty. Sophie sat near the front, her braids swinging, a notebook open to a new sketch. Clara's heart lifted. The girls' campaign had raised thousands, funds now earmarked for a memorial. Thomas Reed was there too. His fedora tilted, his presence a link to Eleanor's past. Clara took the podium, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "We're here for Rusty," she began, "the dog who's made Willow Grove more than a cemetery, a place of hope." She spoke of Rusty's loyalty, his walks with mourners, his comfort to Sophie, to James, to her. He's Eleanor Hayes's legacy, and we owe him a home here, by her side. Clara unveiled a sketch, not Sophie's, but a sculptor's design, a small stone dog beside Eleanor's grave, holding a locket like hers. Gasps rippled through her room, then applause. Henry stood, gruff but clear. "Sophie's fund can cover it, and I'll tend the ground myself." Ruth added, "It's what this town needs, a reminder of what matters." Clara glanced at Daniel Ward, seated in the back, his face unreadable but quiet. Thomas rose, his voice thin but firm. "My aunt saved Rusty before she died, gave him a home when no one else would. This memorial, it's her wish too." He pulled Eleanor's second locket from his pocket, its E.H. gleaming, and offered it for the monument, to be sealed in glass with the stone dog. Clara's throat tightened, her own locket a twin to his, a circle closing. The room cheered, and Sophie clapped, her eyes shining. Clara stepped down, her legs shaky, but Ruth's hand steadied her. "You did it," she whispered, and Clara felt Tom's pride somewhere deep within. The meeting adjourned, but Clara lingered, drawn back to Willow Grove. Rusty was there, resting by Eleanor's grave, his eyes half closed in the sun. She sat beside him, the grass cool under her hands, and watched a lone figure approach. James, the widower, his scarf loose as always. He knelt by a grave nearby, his wife's, and Rusty stirred, padding over with effort. James didn't speak, didn't need to. Rusty sat close, his presence enough. James's hand rested on Rusty's back, a silent thanks, and Clara's eyes stung. This was Rusty's gift, his last act of comfort, tying them all together. James left, and Clara stayed, her fingers brushing Rusty's fur. He leaned into her, weaker now, his warmth fading like a tide. She thought of Eleanor saving a stray, of Thomas giving up her locket, of Sophie's drawings lighting the town. Daniel's change, his blankets in the blizzard, proved even he wasn't immune. Clara pulled Sophie's latest sketch from her bag, the angel Wink and Rusty, and tucked it by the grave. "You're almost done, aren't you?" she murmured, her voice catching. Rusty's eyes met hers, calm but heavy, as if he knew. The harbor's gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the pine's rustle. Clara heard footsteps and turned to see Sophie, her notebook clutched tight. "I wanted to see him," the girl said, kneeling beside Rusty. She traced his ear, gentle as a breeze, and Clara saw strength in her. A child growing through grief, thanks to a dog. "He'll like the statue, right?" Sophie asked, her voice small. Clara nodded, unable to speak, and Sophie smiled, her braid catching the light. She left the sketch, its colors vivid against the stone, and ran off, leaving Clara with Rusty's quiet breaths. Clara stood, the memorial plan solid in her mind, but her heart ached. Rusty's time was near. She felt it, as sure as the harbor's tide. Tomorrow they'd finalize details, maybe face Daniel one last time. But today, Rusty's presence was enough. The locket, the letter, Sophie's art, they'd carry him forward, into a future Clara was only beginning to see. She glanced back, Rusty's form small against Eleanor's grave, and knew the next dawn would bring a reckoning, for him and for them all. Clara Thompson sat on the dew-damp grass of Willow Grove Cemetery, the summer sun warm on her shoulders as it rose over Boothbay Harbor. Rusty, the gray-muzzled dog, lay beside Eleanor Hayes's grave, his breath shallow, his fur thin, but gilded by light. At 68, Clara felt time's gentle press. But the past months, Rusty's rescue from the blizzard, Sophie's drawings, Thomas Reed's gift of Eleanor's locket, had woven a tapestry of purpose she hadn't known since Tom's death. The memorial plan was set, a stone dog to stand eternal by Eleanor, but Clara sensed today was different, a quiet end to Rusty's vigil. The harbor's gulls called softly, their cries mingling with the rustle of pines, and Clara opened her poetry book, its pages worn from years of touch. She'd read to Rusty before, soothing him through storms, and now, with his eyes half closed, she chose a frost poem, The Road Not Taken, her voice steady but thick. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Rusty stirred, his muzzle nudging her knee, as if the words were his too. Clara's heart ached, knowing each verse might be his last, but she read on, the rhythm a lullaby for them both. Eleanor's grave, etched with a lily, seemed to listen, its silence a partner to Rusty's fading warmth. Footsteps approached, and Clara looked up to see Ruth Carver, her gray hair catching the breeze, her eyes soft with understanding. Henry Brooks followed, his gardener's hands empty of tools, and Sophie, now 9, trailed behind, her braids swinging, a daisy clutched tight. They'd come unbidden, drawn by the same instinct that had pulled Clara here at dawn. No words passed, only nods, As they formed a circle around Rusty, their presence a quiet hymn. Clara paused her reading, the book resting on her lap, and Sophie knelt, placing the daisy by Rusty's paw. "For you," she whispered, her voice small but clear. Rusty's eyes opened, meeting Sophie's, then Ruth's, Henry's, Clara's, each gaze a thread in his story. Clara thought of Eleanor's letter, its love for a soldier lost, and Thomas's tale of a stray saved from the road. Rusty had been Eleanor's shadow, her gift to a town that needed healing. The locket in Clara's pocket, twin to the one sealed in the memorial's design, felt warm, as if Eleanor herself watched. Clara resumed reading, her voice softer now, the poem's final lines a promise. "And that has made all the difference." Rusty sighed, a long, gentle release, and his eyes closed, his body still. Clara's breath caught, tears spilling as she touched his fur, cool now, empty of struggle. Ruth's hand found her shoulder, Henry bowed his head, and Sophie's sob broke the silence, her daisy trembling in the grass. They stayed rooted as the harbor's light spread, bathing Willow Grove in gold. Clara felt Tom's presence, not in grief, but in peace, as if he'd walked this path with her, guiding her to Rusty, to this moment. She closed the book, its weight a comfort, and knew Rusty's story wasn't over. It lived in them, in the town, in the stone dog waiting to rise. By noon the cemetery filled with locals, news of Rusty's passing rippling through Boothbay Harbor like a tide. They gathered around Eleanor's grave, where Henry had begun preparing a spot beside her. Clara stood back, letting others speak, Ruth of Rusty's comfort after her daughter's death, Sophie of her sketches that had saved him. A fisherman of a day, Rusty sat by his mother's burial. Even Daniel Ward was there, his suit less stiff, his voice low as he admitted, "I was wrong about him. He belonged here." Clara's chest swelled, not with triumph but with gratitude, for a dog who'd changed them all. Thomas Reed arrived, his fedora in hand, and placed a small box by the grave. "Eleanor's papers," he said, "found in storage." Clara took it, her fingers brushing its worn edges, and promised to sort them later. The burial was simple. Henry lowered Rusty's body, wrapped in a blanket Sophie had sewn with stars, into the earth. Clara tossed in a page from her poetry book, torn gently, its words for Rusty alone. The crowd sang a hymn, off-key but heartfelt, and Clara felt Eleanor's spirit, her soldiers too, woven into the melody. As dusk fell, the memorial was unveiled, a stone dog, small but proud, holding a glass case with Eleanor's locket, its E.H. gleaming. Sophie's final drawing, angel-winged, Rusty, hung nearby, framed by the town. Clara lingered, the harbor's lights twinkling, and opened Thomas's box alone in her cottage that night. Inside was a diary, Eleanor's, its last entry dated weeks before her death. "Found a stray today, half gone but fierce. Named him Shadow, for he follows me everywhere. If I go, let him stay. Someone will love him as I do." Clara's tears fell, the circle complete. Rusty was Shadow, Eleanor's last act of grace. Clara closed the diary, her heart full. She felt Tom's laugh, Sophie's hope, Ruth's strength, all tied to Rusty's quiet love. The next day she'd visit Willow Grove, leave flowers for both graves, but tonight she wrote in her notebook, "Rusty guardian eternal." The harbor sighed outside and Clara smiled, at peace. She turned to her laptop, typing a note for the story's end, a call to others beyond Boothbay. Share your thoughts on Rusty's tale below. What did he mean to you? I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.